When I was 12, something terrifying happened every night for nearly 2 months. Someone or something would knock on my bedroom window. It always happened between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., sometimes waking me from a deep sleep. Hear it in my dreams, only to wake up and realize the knocking was real. We lived in a ranch-style house, surrounded by a vast, empty cornfield. There were no trees near my window, nothing that could explain the sound. I knew the difference between the wind and the unmistakable sound of knuckles tapping against glass. I was too scared to check. My small nightlight cast a faint glow, but turning on the main light would mean exposing myself to whoever or whatever was outside. My blinds were shut, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was staring back at me from the darkness. After a week, I asked my little sister if she was playing a prank. She was only 7 and got so scared at the idea that she ran to tell our parents. They didn't believe me. They thought I was making it up, just an overactive imagination. Knocking continued, night after night. I started losing sleep. My grades dropped. My teacher noticed and pulled me aside. When I told her about the knocking, she took me to the principal, who called my mom. They had a private conversation when my mom refused to discuss with me. That night, my mom agreed to sleep in my room. I felt safe for the first time in weeks. But when the knocking came at 1:30 a.m., I reached down to wake her only to find the bed empty. My heart pounded as I lay frozen in fear, listening to the steady tapping against my window. After what felt like forever, I gathered enough courage to slide onto the floor and crawl down the hall. My parents were asleep on the couch, the TV flickering in the darkness. I lost it. I screamed and cried, waking them both. My dad, frustrated, promised, "Fine, tomorrow, you and I will wait outside with my shotgun." I didn't think he'd follow through. But the next night, we dressed in dark clothes, me in black, him in camouflage, and hid outside near the back deck. We had a clear view of the cornfield and my window. The moon was out, casting eerie shadows. I tried to stay awake but eventually dozed off. Around 4 a.m., my dad shook me awake. "Nothing but deer," he muttered. "Maybe you were hearing bucks fighting." Relieved and exhausted, I crawled into bed. But just minutes later, bang, bang, bang. The force of it rattled the blinds. My blood ran cold. I lay there, paralyzed, heart pounding so hard it hurt. But I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then silence. That was the last time it happened. The knocking never returned. My parents still insist it was all in my head, but I know what I heard, and I know something was out there, watching. In 2014, the Carter family moved into a beautiful old Victorian house on Blackwood Lane in a quiet town near Toronto. It was a bargain too, cheap for such a large house. But they didn't question it. They were excited for a fresh start. From the very first night, strange things happened. Their daughter, Emily, who was 6 at the time, refused to sleep in her new room. "The lady in the closet keeps staring at me," she whispered to her mother. Her parents brushed it off as a child's imagination. A week later, Emily's toys started moving on their own. Small things at first, a doll on the shelf, turning to face the door, a toy car rolling across the floor by itself. Then things escalated. Late at night, the sound of footsteps echoed through the empty hallways. The family's dog, Max, would bark furiously at the basement door, growling at something unseen. One night, Emily's father, Mark, woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, he thought it was his wife talking in her sleep, but when he turned over, she was fast asleep. The whispers continued, growing louder. It was coming from the hallway. Mark got out of bed and walked toward the sound. As he turned the corner, he saw a shadowy figure standing at the top of the stairs. It was tall, with hollow eyes that gleamed in the darkness. Just as he reached for the light switch, the figure vanished. The next morning, Mark checked the history of the house. What he found chilled him to the bone. In the early 1900s, a woman named Margaret Holloway had lived there. She was accused of witchcraft by the townspeople and was locked in the basement, where she died of starvation, determined to prove it was all in their heads. Mark placed a baby monitor in Emily's room that night. What he heard made his blood run cold. A raspy voice whispered, "Come play with me, Emily." That was the last night the Carters spent in that house. They left everything behind and never looked back. The house on Blackwood Lane remains abandoned to this day. But some say, if you stand outside on a quiet night, you can still hear whispers coming from inside. It was a dark, rainy night when Samantha, a young woman in her mid-20s, found herself stranded on a desolate highway. The storm had hit out of nowhere, and her car had broken down just miles from the nearest town. No one else was on the road, and the dense woods surrounding her seemed to stretch forever. She tried calling for help, but there was no signal. Frustrated, she got out of the car and walked towards a small, dimly lit gas station she saw in the distance. As she walked, she noticed an old, rusted pickup truck parked by the side of the road. It looked like it hadn't been moved in years, the tires half buried in the mud. A man stood by the truck, wearing a weathered jacket and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Samantha hesitated, but continued walking toward him, hoping he could help her. "Hey, excuse me," she called out. The man didn't respond, but she noticed his gaze never left the ground. "Are you okay?" she asked, feeling an uneasy chill run down her spine. The man slowly looked up, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow and sunken. "I've been waiting for a ride," he muttered, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. Samantha felt an instinctual pull of fear, but forced a smile. "I'm stuck, and I need help. Can you give me a ride into town?" Atia's lips twisted into a thin, unsettling smile. "You're in luck," he said, taking a slow step towards her. "I've been waiting for someone." Something felt off. The air around her grew colder, the rain harsher, and the man's presence felt suffocating. Without thinking, Samantha took a step back, shaking her head. "No, I'll be fine. I'll wait for the tow truck." The man stepped forward again, blocking her path. His smile grew wider, exposing yellowed teeth. "You can't outrun fate." Before Samantha could react, she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. A sleek black SUV pulled up beside her, and the driver rolled down the window. "Are you all right?" the driver asked. He looked concerned, but his eyes were also strangely distant. Samantha turned back to look at the man by the truck, but he was gone. In his place, there was only the faintest trace of wet footprints leading into the woods. "I think I'll take the ride," Samantha said, her voice trembling as she climbed into the SUV. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The vehicle started driving away, but as it picked up speed, Samantha glanced at the rearview mirror. For a split second, she saw the man's face in the reflection, grinning wide, his eyes burning with an unnatural glow. Suddenly, the car jolted and screeched to a halt. Samantha screamed. But when she turned to look at the driver, he was gone. Only the steering wheel moved, as if it were being controlled by invisible hands. The car began driving itself, heading straight into the dark woods where no one could hear her scream. The storm outside was now a distant memory. The only sound left was the eerie hum of the car's engine, and a man's voice echoing in her mind. "I've been waiting for you."